Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. I'm Anne Burroughs. I'm the president and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum. And it's been a very proud few days for us, actually, more than just a few days. It feels as though it's been, in fact, it has. It's been several weeks, in fact, several months since we first started working on this exhibition, and we really could not think of a more fitting way to celebrate and to commemorate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month than with the opening of At First Light, the dawning of Asian Pacific America. So we're delighted to have you here this evening. And you know, as I said to folks yesterday, we're always very proud when we open an exhibition, when it's ready for prime time, but we really couldn't have been prouder than to be able to work with our partners at Visual Communications in co-producing this exhibition. So the exhibition, as you all know, I'm not going to tell you too much about it because, you know, Karen, we have this fantastic panel and you'll have the opportunity to see the exhibition a little bit later after this if you haven't done so already. But we felt that it was an extraordinarily important exhibition for us to be doing at JANM because it recounts the evolution of the Asian Pacific American political identity in the 1970s and the 1980s. And of course, partnering with Visual Communications, which was so critical in capturing that time and helping to inspire that movement, that we just felt it was just so right that we do that exhibition now. So the exhibition is drawn from literally hundreds and thousands of images and over 100 films from VC's collection. And it's an extraordinary recounting and a showing of people, many of you in the same room, and you'll recognize, if not yourselves, in the photographs, you'll recognize others in the photographs. But people who came together to work, people who were getting together simply, you know, just not working, having fun, just being people, being community. But also, it's an extraordinary showing of people who worked so incredibly hard to organize together, to build unity, to build this identity, to claim this identity. But for me also, it's to build, when I look at it and I reflect on it, I wasn't there, but I reflect on my own interpretation of what that meant was that it really was an extraordinarily important time around which the political power was built around that identity and what that has meant going forward and the impact of that on American history. And of course also it's an extraordinary testament to what happens to the resilience and the resistance embodied in that exhibition, and it serves as a very powerful reminder and a call to action of what can be accomplished when people unite as a community with a single commitment. And for me also, it's an extraordinary, salutary reminder that so many of those challenges, those same civil rights challenges that were prevalent and that you fought against in the 1970s and the 1980s are as urgent now as they ever were then. So, you know, also I tend to look at these things from a global perspective, you know, wearing my global hat, and I'm also reminded of just, you know, the global history of that time and the resonances between the civil rights movement that was happening here and, you know, the Asian Pacific American movement that was happening here and how that resonated with so many of the other global movements for democracy, for identity and rights, whether it was people marching in the streets in South Korea for democracy or labor rights in the 1970s and the 1980s, or people protesting and working towards the unraveling of the Soviet Union, just to name two. And then, of course, in my own country in South Africa. That was really when so much of the work that we did against apartheid and to overturn apartheid was so strong. And when I see some of those images and I see the dates on some of those images, I'm so powerfully reminded of we were marching in the streets, and we were claiming things, we were claiming rights at the same time as that was happening. So I couldn't be more thrilled that we're doing this at JANM. I'd also, before I introduce our panel, I also want to just thank all of our members and our donors who are with us, and just to, remind all of you that it's because of their support that we're able to do the extraordinary work that we do, that we're able to keep that history alive, and that we're able to present exhibitions like this that still shine such a powerful light on the future, on the present, and help us to think about what the future could look like. So thank you to all of you. So today what we have, I'm so excited. We have an intimate conversation with the founders, the visionaries, the leaders of visual communications, Duane Kubo, Eddie Wong, and Bob Nakamura, who will share some of this history and some of the struggles and some of their hopes and their expectations. And then, of course, moderating it will be scholar, author, producer, and JANM chief curator, Karen Ishizuka. So, Karen, I'm going to call you up, and thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody.
Thanks, Anne. Like last night, we At First Light and has really been a big reunion for so many of us. And here today, too, there's so many people in VC's extended family. I think Supachai Sarangsain has the winner from coming the longest distance. He came from Bangkok, Thailand, not Maine. So Supachai and Ron are here, Ron Tam. Akemi Kikumura Yano, who was so important to VC, is here, as well as Kaz Tolentino, Jeff Chop. There's so many people in our extended VC family who are here. As Duane wrote in the text panel about VC staff, creating media is always a collaborative effort. And he called out an army of unrecognized and sometimes unknown people who helped us stay alive, current, and productive. And then certainly two of our most valuable behind-the-scenes people who enabled us to do this exhibit are VC's ED Francis Culado, and also JANM's polymath, the VP of Exhibitions and Art Director Clement Hanami. So they are really two of the hardest working people I know. And behind the scenes, watching Francis orchestrate the Los Angeles Asian Pacific American Film Festival 2 weeks ago, as well as VC's gala just last weekend, and also wrangling all the technology that we needed for this exhibit was truly very impressive. And watching Clement in action, from painting and building and installing the exhibit to his on-the-spot creative problem solving that inevitably comes up in any exhibit, and minute attention also to the artifacts was equally mind-blowing. But there are two unrecognized and unknown people that I'd like to now name and recognize. As we all know, behind every man who is in front, there is at least one woman that enables them to do what they do. And for us, that is Clement's better half, Christina Tsutakawa, and also Francis's better half, Judy De Vera. And of course, they're not here today because they're off doing what they do to enable them, at least Francis, to be here today. And then also in absentia is the gift that on behalf of the AFL crew, we'd like to give to both of them. The JANM store is making a scarf based on the East First Street graphic that you'll see in the exhibit. And it'll be ready in a couple of weeks. So we want Christina and Judy to be the first to have one. So we want to thank them for their generosity and patience and for sharing their other halves with us. So At First Light, as Anne said, is both a celebration of early Asian Pacific activism in the 1970s and 80s, as well as a call to action that our country is again in need of our intervention. So what makes the past so important to the present is its lessons. And here, both in the present and in the past, are the founders of VC. So I don't know if you can read what's on here. If we could just dim the lights a little bit, but I'm going to read it for you. At the top is Bob Nakamura, filmmaker and photographer. Bob is the founder of the group and continues to provide much of its direction. He has worked with Charles Eames, filmmaker and designer. His film and photo work, which has appeared in Life, Look, and Popular Photography, has received much popular attention and critical acclaim. He is an instructor of photography at Immaculate Heart College in Los Angeles. And then Eddie Wong, a graduate with honors from UCLA's College of Fine Arts. Eddie has been part of VC from its early days. He has served as a consultant to several school districts where his film, Wong Sing Sang, is in use. Eddie is also co-director of Roots, an Asian American reader. Alan Ohashi couldn't be here today, but he was integral part of early VC. And then Duane Kubo, active in numerous community groups. Duane is presently a candidate for a BA in theater arts at UCLA with emphasis upon motion picture production. He is one of the organizers of the Asian Ethno-Communications Film Group at UCLA. So today we'll start with Bob, who went on to teach filmmaking at UCLA for 30 years, was also the associate director of the Asian American Studies Center at UCLA, and also the director of the Center for Ethno-Communications there. He also started the Media Arts Center here at JANM. So I think we'll start with Bob. And actually, Bob and Eddie and Duane, if you all can come up, and then we'll start with Bob.
Hi, so many friends here, so it feels nice and friendly, so I'll be brief. I think all of you know that I feel much more comfortable behind the camera instead of in front of it, so. I think going back to early VC, one of our primary objectives was to develop curriculum through K through 12. If you go back to the 70s and look at the high school curriculum, you'll see that Asian Americans have very, very little space, and that was one of the goals, was to put in Asian Americans within the school curriculum. So the clip I'm going to show you is one of our attempts to bring our history to the students, but in a way that was much more experiential than fact and figures. I'm going to show a piece from Watari Dori, Birds of Passage, which is kind of an overview of the classic immigrant story. This was one of our more major films because of the funding. This was funded through the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Emergency School AIDS Act, called ESA, and the Office of Education. And ESA and the Office of Education played a very important role in the development of VC and the work that they did. And I think we can talk about that later. Anyway, Watari Dori is a good example, I think, of what we were trying to do. In this case, it goes through the lives of the three immigrants: Mr. Mura, who was embodies one type of immigrant, and that was the adventurer, the entrepreneur. He led a very, very exciting life, and didn't come over to find a better life, but came over to find adventure and excitement. And then Mrs. Mura, who kind of was a farmer's wife, a widow, and later an artist. And then the third Issei was Mr. Nakamura, my father, who I think had the classic immigrant story. He came from a poor fishing village in Kagoshima. I remember him telling me about having rice once a year, and that was on New Year's. And the rest of the year, they lived on sweet potatoes. And so his was the classic story of coming over and establishing family and roots. I also just kind of technically, I think if you look at the clip, one of the things that we really felt strongly about is the use of media, not only to get history down, but we tried to give you the feel of the immigrant experience. And I think this sequence is a good example of what we could do with film, with nice editing, color, and sound, to where we begin to put a real face on the Issei who came over. So can we run the clip?
Life was always hard in Kagoshima. Even as a child, I had always heard, go to America, where money is scattered like winter leaves. They used to say that money was sarugurai, enough to rot. I was never a very good student. Instead of studying, I spent my time daydreaming, dreaming of someday returning from America with 10,000 yen, enough for a fishing boat. At that time, it was forbidden for Japanese to enter the United States. We walked through Mexico by the long route over the high mountain passes. There was little water, and it was very cold. In the beginning, there were 4 of us, Yokota, Inoue, Oda, and myself. But Inoue died along the way. World War I had just ended, so business was pretty good. I made 60 cents an hour, $6 a day. I was young then and did nothing but work. I was like a miser. Every night I would wonder, do I have the 10,000 yen yet? From the day after I arrived in Los Angeles, I have been a gardener. As I look back, I don't know how I did it. Riding a bicycle with a lawnmower tied on the back, the edges strapped to the front, and a rake in one hand. Very often, little boys would throw stones and chant, "Jap, Jap," as I rode down the street. There aren't many times when we old friends get together. So on these rainy days when no one can work anyway, we play cards, tell jokes, and laugh. We are all from the same village, old-timers and new arrivals. In a poor village, people must cooperate in order to survive. We have brought this habit with us to America. If I need money, I can always go to our Tanamoshi. If someone is sick or needs help, every one of us here would do what is necessary. I think without this village spirit, we could not have survived the Depression, the war, and the prejudice. In my mind, we are more than friends. We are like brothers.
You go. Have got that oil. Maybe they don't need me. 75, 50 more.さあ、50行ってみるか。あ、そうか。ああ、そうかね。いやいや。ああ、そうした、そうした。いや、せっかくでいいと思ったがね。いや、もう、今日もちょっとなんかあれ、それいつもフランスでしたね。3、1、2、3、から。
I am a Meiji man, a man who hates to lose. I've been that way since I was born. From the time I was small, I loved sports and hated to lose at anything. So I did very well in judo. No matter where I performed, I was not ashamed. I did well and quickly rose to sandan. At that time, there were perhaps 10 people of that rank in the United States. Some disapprove of my makegirai attitude, but that is my way, and that is the way I teach. People do not believe me when I tell them I am now in my 70s. I have been blessed with a strong, healthy body and still feel young in spirit. So when friends and relatives come to me for advice and counsel, I am surprised, very often a little embarrassed, to think that I, Harukichi, a village bad boy, has now become an elder. I cannot get over that, and I have to laugh. My wife and I used to talk of returning to Japan when I retire. In my mind, this is no longer possible. My places here in this country with my grandchildren and the grandchildren of my old comrades. The Japan I left over 50 years ago no longer exists.
This whole concept of immigration and some of the issues that we're dealing with now really are reflected in here and have, a lot of resonance for what's happening today. Yeah. Next, I'd like to introduce Eddie Wong. I met Eddie first when he was probably 18, and his dimples are still there. Actually, they all have dimples.
Our dimples have dimples.
Anyway, Eddie grew up to be the regional director for the Rainbow Coalition, former executive director of NATA, which is now the Center for Asian American Media, as well as the Angel Island Immigration Foundation. And he's retired now, but as mad as hell about Trump, so he's stirring up the muck by blogging at eastwindezine.com. So check it out, hoping to connect old and new activists. So Eddie.
I'm going to stand because I have a bad back and bad knees, and I could give you a catalog of all my ailments, but it would take too long. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what led up to VC, but before that, I have to thank a lot of people. And both of my sisters are here from Georgia, that sorrowful state. But thank you for coming. I hope you stay. Oh, that's my sister, my older sister. She always has the last word. Their daughters are here. Sonia's here, my niece. So thank you for coming. And then I have some old friends, friends I've met when I was 12, and that's like from junior high school. Bancroft Junior High School. Woo! Marianne, Ira, I think Carol's here. And of course, last but not least, my daughter is here, Maggie from Chicago. So thank you all for coming. And then of course, all of you who I've known like for years through the movement and art circles and all kinds of things. Well, let me start by just saying really briefly that a lot of us weren't supposed to be filmmakers. I grew up in a family where the arts were kind of, that was a nice thing to like look at and do, but to actually work at it was something like you could never make a living at it. So like, I'm a son of a laundryman. Bob and Duane are both sons of gardeners. We weren't supposed to be in this thing. So we got into it because of affirmative action and a desire to be in the arts. And through UCLA, there was an affirmative action program in filmmaking. And that's really when we first thought, well, maybe it's possible for us to actually do something different and something valuable. And so when we first started, I remember we actually, even before UCLA, we met through Ghidra, which was a community newspaper, radical paper that celebrates its 50th year this year. And we were all in the community, writing articles, taking photographs, and we kind of met each other. And then we re-met each other in film school. So when VC first started, I think it was very small, and actually Bob had started it a few years earlier as a subcommittee of the JACL and did that wonderful exhibit you're going to see later, the camps exhibit, the cubes. And after that, though, we decided that we really were going to focus a lot on developing educational materials. So we started doing photographs, and that led me to this part of the exhibit that I curate. But I remember most of all that Bob was our mentor. I mean, he was one older. He had a car, which is I was taking the bus, right? And he was married, had a kid, and he had this body of work that was just astonishing. Life photography, Life magazine photography, and he taught us about W. Gene Smith and showed us the work of the Farm Security Administration photographers. And I was kind of hooked. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell those kinds of stories, document real lives. And that's kind of a segue into the part of the exhibit that I worked on. I went back and looked at the photographs that we took in the early years, particularly in the 1970s. And what's striking about them is that we covered a lot of different materials: community life, celebrations, festivities, protests, of course. But we also focused on kind of like nice artistic portraits, and trying to like convey the meaning and the dignity of people's lives. And that's really what I set out to do, is like put together as many stories as possible to tell the story behind the photographs. And so several people here today took part and enabled us to make those projects. All these projects were things that Duane shot and that we edited. And I want to just single out some people. Please stand. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about them. Andrea Ling Yamasaki is from Chinatown. And one of the videos you'll see in the kiosks, and all the videos are online, so we'll give out a URL. You could just look at them on your phone at home when you're doing the laundry, whatever. But Duane Kubo took a picture of Andrea when she was 7 in front of her grandmother's grandparents' grocery store in Chinatown. And then she contacted me and said, I'd love to have a copy of that. And I said, oh yeah, could you tell us your story? And she was very gracious enough to sit down and do a video story about what it was like to grow up in Chinatown. So thank you, Andrea. Now, other people here, Cass Tolentino, who's a fixture in the beginning of Filipino-American Studies at UCLA Asian American Studies Center. He narrated several videos for us about the life of historic Middletown, the life of the Manong. So thank you, Cass. Mike Barase, who's in the audience, did the piece, the commentary on the first Asian Americans for Peace rally in Little Tokyo, the first anti-Vietnam War rally in Little Tokyo. And then Sandy Maishiro, who's up there, commented on a group that many people do not even know about anymore, and it was called the Storefront, which was an attempt to actually have third world community organizing, African Americans and Japanese Americans and other people living in the Crenshaw district in the old Sainan area. And that video really explores how difficult it is to do community organizing, but also how important that attempt is. Mia Iwataki, who single-handedly almost spearheaded the first Little Tokyo Health Fair, is here today. And her video really is an important reminder that so many of the institutions in our community started from Serve the People programs, from grassroots activists saying we have to do something about poverty or healthcare in our communities. And I'm sure I'm leaving other people out. So if I do, I'm sorry, I'm just blanking on your names right now. But so many people took part in making these videos. There are about 30 videos, and Duane took part in doing a whole series of videos as well. But I just want to start by showing you this one video we did, and it is of the Little Tokyo Nisei Week Parade in 1972. And what distinguished that parade was there was a march of young people to protest the Vietnam War. And you'll see a big poster of that photograph out in Little Tokyo. I believe it's on first corner of Central, something like that. But nobody knows why they were there. I mean, what were they thinking, you know? So this video, I was able to ask several people who took part in that demonstration to talk about it years later. And so you'll hear from Scott Nakatani, Eddie Kochiyama, Mary Uematsu Kao, and Pam Iguchi. So here's the Van Troy Brigade at Nisei Week.
It just seemed wrong. And it wasn't only because they were Asians and Vietnamese people that looked like us, but for my own thing, I knew Nick had gone to Vietnam. I knew that nobody wanted to go to Vietnam. I mean, we were dealing with the lottery still. It was at the end of it. And it just seemed like a wrong war. Your high school age, it's real easy to feel like you can't do anything about anything. It's real easy to, so in a way, even going back to LA High, all the people that kind of got involved were looking for something to belong to that seemed worthwhile.
As soon as we got there at the beginning of the summer, people saying they wanted to have some big Asian American contingent demonstration at the Nisei Week Parade. And people had an idea to call it the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade. So aside from doing our regular jobs, like every week we'd get all these young people together. Sometimes where I was staying at this place, the West Side Collective, in different community spots, and we'd do education around the anti-war movement. And who was this person, Win Van Troy? What was the significance of that? And we talked a lot about raising the stakes, as there was already an anti-war movement going on for years, but it was all about bring the troops home and stop the war. But we were saying, you know, you're killing Asian people, and they're fighting for the national liberation. So we took a stand that we're supporting the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, which is quite radical at that time. And we also wanted to say something about Japanese militarism during the Nisei Week Parade.
Well, the thing I like to tell people is how important that was, that especially for Japanese Americans, to take something like Nisei Week, which is this kind of showpiece, right, to the larger world, and for us to, you know, try and get out our anti-war message in that, especially talking about like the complicit role of Japan. Right. At that time, there was the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty that, you know, we had done a lot of organizing around. And, you know, to point out what role of Japan's role in this whole war, Vietnam, because, you know, you don't really hear about it, except you hear that people go there for R&R and this and that. You know, Japan was really strategic in terms of the U.S. really launching that whole thing. And so it was important for Japanese Americans to really kind of step forward and criticize Japan's role in the whole thing, as well as the U.S.
There were a couple of Niseis who went crazy. They were like yelling at us. It was kind of like if we had burnt the American flag, I think, to them. Mm-hmm. I understand it, you know, because to them, that's a symbol of their culture. And who are these young kids talking about the war in Vietnam and burning this, you know. They were kind of upset. A lot of people, I think, were stunned. They didn't exactly know what happened, but we got in the skirmish line, we continued marching. Really, it was a life-changing thing, you know, in a positive way. For me personally, and I know for others, when I talk to Eddie still, Kochiyama, we still talk about, oh, that was like the greatest summer ever.
Oh, it's great. I mean, it was just like, I mean, you're a young person, you have all this energy, you have all this passion, and here's this cause that you could get behind. And the anti-war movement was really broad, and in that, and I, you know, when I look back at the pictures of the the Van Troy Anti-Imperialist Youth Brigade. I mean, really, there was a broad spectrum of Asian Americans, young people, that were part of that that whole movement. And you know, we just had a lot of fun during that summer. We made a lot of friends, we did a lot of partying, and it was just, you know, hell of fun. It was just, you know, it was wonderful. Everyone should have that experience, you know. You know, I would really encourage young people to get involved in some struggle and do some reading, you know, outside of the mainstream information, because there's so much that going on in the world that we don't know about, that we don't hear about in the media, because it's corporate media. And so, you know, it's I would encourage young people to get involved.
Great that, you know, Eddie and Duane just not only culled through hours and hours and hours and hours, really thousands and thousands of photographs, went through hours of film and video footage, and actually found things that no one even knew about. So it was really quite an effort that they've been working on for really the last 2 years. And you know, it's wonderful to be able to see people like Scott Nagatani, who so many of us know as a musician. And he is, you know, everywhere. He played at the VC Gala just last week, and he'll be playing at the JACCC Gala, I think. And he's just, you know, so much of a fixture. But to see how he became politicized and how much this era meant to him is just really, you know, very inspiring. So now, Duane grew up to be the Dean of the Intercultural and International Studies from De Anza College, where he also taught Asian American Studies. And then after retirement, he created the J-Town Community TV, a YouTube channel, and co-founded the Silicon Valley Asian Pacific Film Festival. This is all up from his home base now in San Jose. San Jose. Okay. Okay. So, you know, you can see that, you know, all three of them have maintained a lot of activity, and I think a lot of it is, like Pam said, is really wanting to pass it on to young people, and to continue to this legacy of activism and using media specifically in terms of activism. So, Duane.
As Eddie said, we have many thanks to give during this whole process, and we talked about the museum and VC and the staff, et cetera, but we should also point out that I would say Karen Ishizuka was really the centerpiece of this entire project, because she was the person who was speaking for the three of us with the museum, and she was actually dealing with the museum hierarchy as well. So thank you very much, Karen. I really feel that this is really part of your exhibit. So last night I was talking to a few people, and I was surprised to see that they had walked right past the iPads, and they didn't even know that we had these 30 stories that were collected out of the archives. And in many ways, they give you the range and diversity of VC's last 40 years. So please be sure to stop by the iPads and the stories from the archives. There are going to be like 20 more stories than the ones that we've showed you today. And they're all just as excellent as that is recent cut. I also just took 4 excerpts from some of those stories that I wanted you to see. First off, I think many people know that VC has been blessed to have some really excellent executive directors, people who have led VC over the years, and Francis Collado is certainly cut in the vein of all of those great executive directors. But we've had 2 kind of singularly unique people that have led VC, but who have since passed on. And we wanted to pay tribute to the both of them. And so if you get a chance, check out the House It, the tribute to Linda Mabalit, who was really led VC through a very difficult time, and who was a real inspiration, I think, to the kind of multicultural approach that VC has now to its media work. And so it's called House It, a tribute to Linda Mabalit. But today I'm going to show you just a cut out of a tribute that I did for Steve Tatsukawa, who passed away quite some time ago, 1985, at a very young age of 35. But he, in that short period of time, I think, left a very big impression on all of us who have been part of GIDRA, VC, and really the Asian American movement. And so I took these old photographs, but really the amazing part was I had asked Mia Yamamoto, attorney here in LA, to write an original song honoring Steve. And she took it up right away, and she started writing lyrics. She put together a band, and they recorded this song, which was amazing in just a couple months that we had to put this video together. So this is an original song tribute to Steve Tatsukawa, along with some old visuals. So that's the first clip. The second one is, I was a little disappointed that we haven't been able to show Hitohata Raise the Banner, which is VC's only feature narrative, and we're still working on that transfer. But I wanted, I did some interviews with those of us that worked on the film, and just wanted to show you a little bit of it because give you a feel for our relationship working with the actors, as well as what the community meant to us in making that film. The third clip, and these are all going to just come right in a row, so just look for them. The third clip is, it's really about Little Tokyo in the 1970s. All of us were embroiled in this redevelopment struggle. Little Tokyo was changing fast. Japanese corporations were coming in and trying to take over much of the land here in Little Tokyo. And of course, the community came together to resist that. And this is really about what was happening during that time. And in many ways, I'm really proud of this work because VC did not come out with products per se, films, but we engaged ourselves in the struggle in Little Tokyo. VC were tenants. We were tenants in the Sun Building, which was kind of the unofficial community center of Little Tokyo. So we were under eviction notice, and so we became part of the redevelopment struggle itself. And to give you an idea of how we used media, some days, some of us would take video, and by the way, this is in the first generation of portable video recording. So we would literally lug big recorders down to the Community Redevelopment Agency and record their meetings. And so they would talk about the residents in Little Tokyo and what they were going to do in terms of moving them out, et cetera, et cetera. But we would take that video recording, recorded that afternoon, and play it back that evening in the hotel lobby where these residents lived. And now, because the meetings were held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, working people could not go to these meetings. But when we played it back in the evening, they heard and saw how their futures were being discussed in these CRA meetings. And I can still remember people like Clarence and Luisa Bita just getting so pissed off about being treated like objects and a commodity within the overall scope of redevelopment of Little Tokyo. And so really this was part of the fight for the future of Little Tokyo. This is still going on today, but I think we can draw a lot of lessons from that fight as well. And then lastly, I just put together short excerpts out of the Los Angeles Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, and I think we're all familiar with that. I was surprised to know that some people had not seen excerpts of, I think, the adversity that many of these courageous Nisei faced when testifying before the commission. When I say adversity, first off, I put in the clip of S.I. Hayakawa, who was probably the best-known Japanese American of that time, but how he was working against the community interests. And so this is the kind of thing that people were up against. And then finally, I was surprised to learn that someone did not see or ask me about Lillian Baker, who was the head of a group called Americans for Historical Accuracy, that were opposing this kind of redress and reparations at the time. And so I just put a short clip in there about that. So they'll run all four together, and then we can talk about, I think, all of our clips after that. So thank you very much.
Came back to cops who didn't like what we had to say. They were banging on this dude with some rocks in his pocket. The cops said he's a criminal, but we said he's a prophet. The cops chased colored students in the Capitol Hall with their guns, badges, billy clubs. Now, who you gonna call? The war I thought I left behind had followed me home, while the cops popped his rebel for the pebbles he'd thrown. Rise and low, I can feel your fire still burning. Don't you know? I can see our time still turning. Yellow pearl, I still hear their voices humming. Brave new world.
Let me first talk about Mako. It was pretty scary meeting Mako for the first time. I had known him just kind of casually, but he had a reputation of being kind of gruff and being the man in the entertainment field in LA. So what did you think of Mako when you first met him?
Kind of grumpy. It was just a grumpy guy, but as we worked with him in Hitohata, you really, there's a kind of a kindness about him.
And I will also say one other thing about his being nervous. Pat used to bring to the set a bottle of Absolute vodka, a quart of Absolute vodka, and he would tell our PA, Stan Nakazono, to put it in the freezer, and in between takes, they would take little cups and bring it out to Pat, and he'd swig this little cup of Absolute, and then just kill those scenes.
The people united will never be defeated. 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 The people united will never be.
I think the basic reason why we're here is that the simple fact that the residents want to stay. And we got to keep emphasizing to people that we're not just talking about the eviction of some hotel, we're talking about people and families being thrown out of their homes in the community. Now the evictions mean a real concrete step towards the destruction of Little Tokyo. This is our community, the Latinos here, the workers, and people of all nationalities who live and work in Little Tokyo, and the Japanese Americans who relate to it as a significant social and cultural center. And today, in this whole campaign to stop the evictions, is part of a stand that we're going to take to make our community what we want it to be, not what big business in the city has in mind for. And we're going to expose the kind of tactics the CRA has been using to try and get rid of the Sun Hotel residents, letting the conditions in the hotel become unlivable, and harassing the tenants by threatening to bring immigration officials down. This kind of what we see happening to the Latino residents here and the Japanese American community as a whole is part of a long history of the kind of treatment that minorities and working people have faced in this country.
You know, it attracted a lot of attention by a lot of younger people who felt like Little Tokyo, what it represented to them, their identity.
Good morning and welcome to the first of a series of field hearings that the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians will be having around the country. A couple of weeks ago, the Commission had its first hearings in Washington, D.C. We are scheduled to have a number of hearings around the country so that we can carry out the mandate given to us by Congress and the President to look into the question of wartime relocation and internment of civilians during World War II.
The trouble-free and relatively happy lives at all the other relocation centers can be attributed to a cultural trait. To a cultural trait of the Japanese clearly seen in the Issei but almost unheard of in their American-born grandchildren, namely the concept of gaman. Gaman is to endure with patience and dignity hardships, misfortunes, or injustices, especially those about which nothing can be done.
My name is Martha Okamoto. Sorry, it's hard on here. I will try very hard, excuse me. My brother, as in regards to my brother James, who was killed at Manzanar, I have never been able to talk about this, but more people have come up to me and said I must speak out. My children, even my own children, don't know that my brother was shot in the back. And as this gentleman over here mentioned, I was at the Gardena meeting, but after Miss Baker, this Caucasian woman, the blonde lady, was so negative, I just could not stand it any longer. I couldn't even talk in a small group. And so I walked out and left. Tonight I have more courage because my husband is with me. But I've just gotten kind of rattled. And I would try to give it as I recall.
A lot of people are against that, which we have never, the 44th Circuit has never said anything of such to anyone.
No, wait. I'm sorry. No, wait a minute. Listen.
I'm sorry.
If we have outbursts like this, we're going to ask people to be removed.
We know how some people are.
Now, wait a second. There are some...
Wow. Gosh, I remember that day. You know, I was in that courtroom, and to see that, and you all saw Evelyn shouting, "Get her out." Some things don't change. But you know, it really, these videos really show us how media has really not only documented, but actually helped frame and continue and nurture a sense of activism that we really need. And for Duane and Eddie to go back and not only find the footage and the still photographs, but also the taking the time to find people who were there, who actually made history, and have them reflect on this making of history, really is just invaluable. So I think this is sort of the long-term value and significance of organizations like Visual Communications. So at this point, I think we'll just open it up to questions. I'm the Thai-Jap, second generation VC guy, and I've been in the archives. I know how much stuff is in there, and I know you guys worked on this for a couple of years, maybe. How did you kind of have an idea, Bob, going into it, what you wanted to do with this exhibit, or did you have to kind of mold it as you went? How did you start to, I know it's probably hard to do in a succinct way, but how did you come to structure your decision making in terms of what you would select to put up in the show?
Well, the first thing that happened is I think we all panicked. If you go into the VC office, half of one side of it is all archived. And, but I think it's important, one thing we should really point out that was kind of a staple that VC started with, was developing an archive. We knew the kind of backbone of being able to document and present our own histories is in the archive. And so we did a lot of work with the archives at the beginning, and actually we really continued on and added on. So for this exhibit, it was hard. Number one, we wanted to be gender balanced. We wanted to be community balanced. We have some really nice shots here, but too many of the, we had too many of those, and so it took we made small work prints of about 300 or 400, and we started selecting from there and broke it down into communities. We built a false wall in my living room and kind of kept putting up things on the wall, and it was, well, I actually kind of enjoyed it, but it was kind of an arduous task. But it was enjoyable seeing what we all looked like 50 years ago. I haven't changed, everyone else has. So.
Yeah, I guess one other note is that all three of us were together at Bob's house on the election night of November 2016, and you could imagine, we felt worse and worse as the night went on, and then I couldn't sleep that night. I mean, I literally could not sleep. I just fuck. So that fueled a lot of the enthusiasm to do this exhibit, because it wasn't just about history, but it was about a period of time that's eerily reoccurring, right? And so the message was look, we had so many things we wanted to do that we just didn't have the budget for. We wanted an analog component that was all about the anti-Muslim, anti-South Asian things that have happened. We were looking at some artists to actually construct and commission some work. We weren't able to do all those things. So we're hoping that through a series of public programs that'll happen hopefully each month during the run of the exhibit, we can begin some of those discussions. I know Duane's planning one on the future of Little Tokyo. I don't know, you want to talk about that? Is that happening?
Yeah, as most of you know, hello? Test. As most of you know, that there's the big effort right now to declare First Street North a historical area and to kind of bring this under community control. And so that video, the 1970s, Fight for Redevelopment, is really about control of Little Tokyo as well. So we're hoping that they will use that video as kind of a catalyst for a discussion about the future of First Street North. So.
Right, and I think on July 12th, we're trying to put together a panel that's entitled Building the Asian American Movement Then and Now. So we have a couple of OGs. You know who OGs are, right? You know, well, it used to be original gangsta, but now it's just like old guys, old gals. And, well, I don't want to say anything about that, but Florante Ibanez, longtime Filipino-American activist, Mia Iwataki, are representing the OGs, and we have a couple of young activists who are doing tenant organizing in Chinatown, Tiffany Doe and Francis Hun coming, and a few others that we're inviting still. But, you know, really it's an exploration of like, what sustains a movement? Why do we do this kind of work? And I think the other reason behind the exhibit is we want to show that there's a value in doing documentation. And you have to be purposeful about it. It doesn't just happen because, you know, you have an iPhone, you know, and everybody has some kind of smartphone now. They can be shooting video, cataloging events, all that stuff. But you have to have it in some kind of framework. You have to have some purpose behind it. So I'm hoping that people will get inspired by the exhibit and want to continue doing this kind of work. Because, you know, all those things are still happening. You know, Asians are getting together at the night market in Orange County, like thousands of people hanging out, enjoying each other, having food. But, you know, what's the social consciousness there? You know, who's going to explore that kind of stuff? So that's up to you guys, the next generation. We're retired.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could speak about the process of starting the original Ghidra and what triggered it. I read about it, but I just want, like, in your own words.
Well, actually, we have some of the original Ghidra founders in the audience. I wasn't one of the founders, but Mike Morales, Susie Wong, people who were the original.
What triggered it? Was there a moment that made you, like, really angry? I mean, I read about it, but I want to know from the people who started it. Because usually there's something that lights your fire, right? And then the process, like what kind of equipment you had to buy, what kind of things you had to get.
Mike Ross is right there.
So I'm just curious about the process of starting the original Ghidra, what kind of equipment you had to get, the just actual process, all the steps.
I don't think
and
some
what
people
triggered
even know what Ghidra is, so maybe we...
Well, I think to understand Ghidra, you have to understand the times and also the state of the Asian American community at that time. In the 1960s, in the community, you know, a lot of the Niseis in the Japanese American community were in the process of reestablishing their lives after the interruption of camps. A lot of the new immigrants were struggling just to work and make ends meet. So a lot of the young people, we were kind of seeking our own identity in a sort of a social paradigm, which was mostly like a black and white at that time. And I think it's probably not, you know, like you look at today, like the influence of the Latino culture, Latino people in Los Angeles is quite immense, but it wasn't. It was a black and white paradigm, and in that, Asian American young people were trying to figure out how do we fit in, and we didn't learn where we fit into society through school. We didn't have any ethnic studies, so part of the struggle was to fight for ethnic studies. The other social context was more international. The civil rights movement in the South and other countries throughout the world, but particularly the Vietnam War was a big influence on us. And in general, we felt that it was just morally wrong, but also there was a racial aspect to it, in that it was a lot of, you know, it was fought in an Asian country. A lot of Asian innocent people were dying, and I think not only the fact that they were dying, but that in the major media, Asian lives were discounted, and I think Asian American people felt or identified with their struggle as well for that reason. And so in that context, fighting for ethnic studies and fighting to understand ourselves and then to understand the world, I think we wanted to, you know, tell stories from our own perspective. It wasn't being told in the LA Times, and unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't being told in the Rafshimpo or other ethnic vernaculars as well. So people felt like they had some things to say, they had some things to share with each other, and I think that's, how some of the students at UCLA began the newspaper Ghidra, but it quickly spread to a lot of other young Asian Americans relating to the Ghidra expression and us having a voice in the kind of things that we did. Sorry for being so long.
Hey, Mike. Thanks. Hi. Mike did a great job of talking about the political and global aspects and the stories framework of Ghidra. I'd like to just add that it was also a very personal experience for those of us who lived in the Ghidra house, for those of us who explored Asian American identity, not only as children of immigrants and children of, say, Chinese American, being a Chinese American, but it was a house that had different Japanese food, it had Chinese food, we cooked together, we argued together, we not only argued against the world, but we came to terms with a mission and something we felt we had to do, which was to share our stories and to, not our stories, but the Asian American stories. When Mike talks about what that world was like, I remember the kinds of equipment we used to put together Ghidra. I mean, there was no cut and paste. You could not go on the computer and drag a picture from someplace and drag it onto your text. Do you remember the light box? We had light boxes, and we meticulously, sometimes with beer and sake aiding us, but we meticulously cut words out, put them together. And we also did some work cultivating and editing stories. So Ghidra was cartoons, it was poetry, it was stories, it was interviews. It took on many forms.
Was that, I can't see, is that Susie Wong? Oh my gosh, that's Eddie's younger sister who's come from Georgia.
Older sister.
She's my older sister.
Oh.
She never lets me forget that.
Okay, sorry. She seems younger to me. And I think Dean Toji would like to speak.
How you do something like Ghidra, if you're interested in how you do start a magazine like Ghidra, you can do it yourself. There's some people trying to launch it again. Taiji's been going to the meetings.
That's me.
Talk about it.
That's me. I just did it.
Why are you asking?
Because I want to hear from you, too.
That was Dean Toji, who was not only a staff person on Ghidra, but was one of the preeminent artists that Ghidra was known for, their art.
Mia, you were
Anyone
talking?
else? Mia.
Last night, when we went to the sneak preview of the exhibit, I was blown away by walking in there and seeing that hand-painted mural with all the, the video shots coming. That was the most creative thing I've seen, and I wanted to ask you to talk about, how you put the exhibition together. What was your thinking behind each part of it?
That's Mia Iwataki, and she's referring to the, it's called FSN 1972. It's a video installation that Tadashi Nakamura, filmmaker, provided for us, made for us. So maybe, Tad, you can talk a little bit about, Tad.
Well,
Wait, hold on.
People came to hear them talk, not.
Well, just a little bit about how sort of the past and the present.
Darren Wakasa and myself, worked with the founders in terms of, I guess our job was to make it more relatable to young people, even though I'm almost 40. So we should have got actual young people. But I think for me, the challenge is always how to make archival material come to life. And I think, you know, for example, I was lucky enough to go to the actual Far East Cafe. My son will never know what the Far East Cafe, the real Far East Cafe was like. So, you know, those are one of the things in the graphic, which is the original graphic from the original educational kits that VC made. So to me, it was a time travel back to a street that we all know, but is, you know, is slowly changing, but especially as it changed from the movement days. And then each window is also playing footage from different community events, protests, Sinsip, taking Issei to see the flowers, Chris and Joanne. You know, I think to me, not having lived through that moment in that era, what I appreciated, it was a movement, but it was also a culture, and it was also, you know, a community building, like people were saying. And so anyway, just trying to get more of a variety, and to kind of make it come to life from a paper to the wall.
Thanks, Ted.
So just to give you a general overview, Bob concentrated on the still photograph exhibits. So, you know, both the people and places, as well as, you know, that was his Manzanar layout. Eddie called many still photographs out of the archives to put them into nice little video clips. And these are the real stories behind the archives. And I concentrated on a lot of the motion footage in the archives, the 3/4-inch video, 1/2-inch video, the community work, that kind of thing. So generally, we divided up our work in that way. And I have to really pay tribute to Abe Ferrer, who put together the last room, which is kind of like a hodgepodge of VC stuff, but you know, really feels like VC in that room. Just a bunch of stuff all over, and it's all kind of happening at once. So the first 3-4 rooms have Darren's really nice, clean design, and that last room is like, wow, it's VC. But that's part of how this was all kind of arranged.
I'd like to put a backstory to the East First Street drawing. That was one of our early projects, the EUS kit. And Alan and Ohashi, which I should say Alan drew that, and Alan really became the kind of, with his graphics, gave VC its own particular look. But the original Little Tokyo scene we wanted to do was, we wanted to shoot what was happening in Little Tokyo every 3 months and watch its development. So the street scene you see was part of a panoramic photograph that we were going to do starting at San Pedro Street and move the camera and shoot until we hit Alameda. So we had put together that panorama, and then Alan decided that it'd be much better as a graphic. So that's how that graphic of East First Street was created. And we should all really, I wish Alan were here because he deserves a lot of credit for really giving VC its own particular graphic look. But that was a great question. I think we all came in with different skills, and I think at that time it was a great chemistry. We all contributed to various parts of the project.
And that First Street graphic is the one that I mentioned before that we're going to be making a scarf out of. So please come back and visit the JANM store. Our store manager, Maria Kwong, has been working really hard on getting a very nice, really good quality scarf. And it's that iconic East First Street that's going to be on it. Also, I have to say this, that I just got a text from Clement Hanami, the ever-working Clement Hanami, and he did make a text panel that has the website of the website that you can access all of the stories behind the video archives that you can access on your phone, on your computer. And we didn't have that ready at the time that we made the original text panels, but Clement, in his magical way, made it happen, and it's up there now. Any other questions? I think we have room for a couple more.
Hello. I am a professor at Cal State LA. I teach a class, Multicultural Arts LA. And I assigned the David James book, Sons and Daughters of Los. He has a chapter on VC, which I teach the students. I wonder if you're familiar with it, and if you, what did you think about his characterization of the change in VC from what he seems to say is a more critical edge versus when the 1980s came and the Asian American population diversified. He kind of says that it lost its critical edge. So I wonder if you could speak to that. Thank you.
David was here last night, and so he was able to see the exhibit, so that was great. So if you guys can speak about that. Well, just the concept of the change, you know.
I know it's hard to say because, you know, I was only at VC for the first 7 years, you know, and so I think, you know, I think organizations adapt to the times and the circumstances, and so there was always a funding issue. There was always an issue of how to enlarge its audience, and you know, I think I don't know exactly the passage you're referring to, but you know, my interactions with David he's been so supportive of our work in general. I think the question is, how do you last 50 years as a nonprofit media group? I mean, you're subject to, you know, capricious funders, okay? Meaning you're no longer the flavor of the month, you know, and so it's on to something else. And so VC, I think, started as a media collaborative, almost a collective, and doing production work. And then it had to evolve into being a media arts center, doing a variety of services, you know, filmmaker support, education, exhibition, and it had to sort of do a lot of training programs too. So it did less production because there was less funding for production. So I think it's adapted well over the years, and I think the real question is, what's going to be the next 50 years? You know, like our population has grown, whereas in Orange County, for example, I think the next year's census will show that 1 out of every 4 residents in Orange County will be Asian or Pacific Islander. That's astonishing, 25%. I mean, you know, so that makes a huge impact economically, culturally, and the same is true for LA County. So watch out, we're coming.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that is that this exhibit was about early VC. We left it open-ended because there's a sequel coming up, and that's the kind of generation 2 of VC, where it began to change from, as Eddie said, from a production company to a media arts center. And I think that not only reflects the people who joined VC later on, but just the general idea of Asian Americans in the media. I think we had a lot of us at the time in the early days were kind of guerrilla filmmakers, documentary, real low budget, kind of edgy, both in the looks of our films and what we did. But I think as the idea of people of color in the media changed, we have a lot of younger people going to film schools, looking at the narrative forms rather than the documentary forms. So I think VC accommodated that and began to really work with developing a film festival, helping young film majors makers. And so I think VC2 reflected kind of a change in young people who are interested in going into media.
I think one other thing is that with today's tools, just about anybody can become a filmmaker. Not that everyone should, but you certainly have the opportunity. And just to let you know that the clips that I did in the video stories, I did it in iMovie, you know, which is like free, cheap, easy to use. I don't know any better. I mean, I could learn Final Cut, I suppose, but old people resist learning new things. But what I'm saying is that it doesn't cost that much to shoot, and you have to want to tell a story. And that's what I'm really going after with young people, is that, you know, you have an opportunity to tell your generation's story, your community's story. Don't worry about Hollywood. You know, Hollywood will always be there. Just cut your teeth on making these short docs and just keep going. But it's important to tell people what we're about. That's really what motivated us. So every generation has a different story to tell. I just want more people to do it. And I think some of that you can see in the LA Pacific, Asian Pacific Film Festival that VC does. There's a lot of new short work, and it's really good. You have a question? Oh, Jocelyn.
I'm coming. Sorry, I'm coming.
Hi, this is such a thrill to hear all of these stories. And I guess I just wanted to echo again how profound it is that you're celebrating 50 years. Because if you think about the other filmmakers of color who were your comrades at UCLA, and I've done research on them, and when I interview them, one of the main sort of sighs that they give is, damn, 50 years, you know, because they decided not to do the community organize. They decided not to have that kind of collective group. You know, a lot of them wanted to be auteurs. They had an interest in Hollywood, like you just mentioned. And I'm not saying that you guys didn't ever have any of that, but the fact that you stayed together solidly for 50 years, that is something that I think you should know, that your comrades in ethno-communications, you know, utter a sigh when they hear that, because they didn't organize and stay together in that way. And so it's a really profound thing that you did, and I just wanted to put that out there.
That was, that's Jocelyn Luckett, and she's been doing, from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's been doing a lot of research. And, you know, we need this down. We need to have it in writing. We need to put it into the canon of American history and culture. And so without, you know, scholars like Jocelyn, who's looking at the big picture, we wouldn't be able to, you know, we make our marks in terms of film on the ground, but, you know, I think that's another really important aspect of the whole effort. Anybody else? Okay.
Just curious, how many boxes of reel-to-reel tape, VHS, beta, floppy disks, all these different mediums you have? How many boxes do you have laying around, all of you? It's a lot. I mean, looking through the archives, it's a lot.
I don't know. We have no idea. Hundreds. Abe Ferrer was still finding stuff in the archives about 2 weeks ago. We never even saw it for the exhibit. It's still coming out. So they're gearing up for the 50th.
Abe's here. So maybe we can run the mic up to Abe or Francis to Abe is back there in his ever-present beret.
Damn, I thought I was going to get away without having to answer a question. The holdings that VC has basically like fills up a large 50-foot shelf on a warehouse space in Hollywood, and then the celluloid-based material, which occupies another 50-foot shelf, sits in temperature storage at the Academy Film Archive. That's the film and the video stuff. A lot of the material, particularly the stills, sits in the archive at Visual Communications over in the basement of the Union Center for the Arts. And we kind of like keep that because we don't treat the archive as an archive. We treat the archive as Visual Communications' primary production resource. Everything that rolls through, whether or not it's film, video, web, photograph, whatever, is all inspired by all those holdings because we activate it constantly.
Thanks, Abe.
So Abe, what's the number now? Like 100,000 still images, 100 films, and what is all that?
Well, right now, in terms of the celluloid stuff that you guys produced and what we produced before we decided to go to a digital policy back in 2005, that's about 550,000 individual images that were either black and white, negatives, or color slides. We have another 250,000 that were exclusively born digital, so you do the math.
Thanks, Abe.
So as Eddie mentioned, we will be having public programs throughout the run of the exhibit. So please watch for them and come back, and you can learn more about VC and the media work that they do. Is there any last minute questions? Jeff?
So did you guys ever have any plans for a sequel or a follow-up to Hitohata?
Jeff, if you got the money, we've got the time.
Well, I'm buying a lottery ticket every week, so I'm trying.
The one thing you can't buy is energy. And I think the OGs are running out. So.
I can barely see. Anything else? Anybody else?
I have a question for actually Karen. You guys put out the book on Asian American Studies. Do you know, and I asked Francis about this last night, are there plans to have the schools?
The exhibit only goes to October 20th, so that's roughly a month after school starts. And I was just wondering, part of Asian American Studies, that was always central to VC, right? And the whole thing to tell the story and educate people about our history. And I was wondering if there's, effort to coordinate that, or maybe have this exhibit be able to travel to some place like UCLA later, or anything along those lines.
This is a question to Karen Umemoto, who is the executive director of the Asian American Studies Center at UCLA.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Taiji. We're old friends. But I'm glad you asked that because I think we would be totally excited about bringing the exhibit to UCLA and then just supporting the distribution in general. We have a digital media platform that we're happy to develop in collaboration with VC to get these images out in storybook form so that we're developing a platform for K through 12 curricula, and we're anticipating that the state will pass and hopefully this governor will sign the bill that requires ethnic studies graduation requirement in all high schools, public high schools in California. And my fear is that we're not ready, you know what I mean, with the curriculum for teachers to be able to use. So we're trying to work overtime to figure out how we can get more curricular materials out there. So Eddie has the book, Mountain Movers, and this is our first attempt to get the story of the history of Asian American studies that they were involved in. I mean, it's amazing just to learn how much came out of the UCLA Asian American Studies Center. All of you, folks at GIDRA, folks at VC, those that came to form so many other Asian community-based organizations, and students from throughout Southern California and the Bay Area and elsewhere. So there's that rich history, and okay, I don't mean to say this in a negative way, but when the Nisei were getting old and we thought we have to capture their histories and do these oral histories, and Densho and other groups were able to do these oral histories, I feel like, you know, folks in the 60s who made history, we need to capture your stories too. So I've been encouraging people at schools around the country to start videotaping the founders of their Asian American Studies programs, because they played a profound role way beyond the university. And, you know, we need to do that while people can remember and still have their
too late for that.
materials and things like that, you know, that they, so you said it, not me. But anyway, yes, we'd love to be partners in moving forward.
Okay, you heard it first here. We got you on tape, Karen. We're going to hold you to it, right? Also, Karen mentioned of interviewing people, and for the 50th anniversary of UCLA Asian American Studies Center, Karen and other people initiated an entire video interviewing oral history. So all three of them have been interviewed for that project. So as much as they hate to be in front of the camera, they did well. Okay, one more. Someone, Dean.
So for each of you, what's the takeaway from the exhibit? Like, people will see the show and they'll say, well, that was great, and then that's it? I don't think so. Well, how would you like them to think differently or feel differently or do something different?
I didn't catch the last part of that, Dean.
What's the takeaway message?
After people see the show, how would you like to have them changed to either feel or think or do something different for the next 50 years?
Well, I think one of the things that I want people to take away is that I think it's very valid what VC started out to do. That technology has changed, but I think the idea of storytelling, how to use media to evoke emotion and give the feel of real people, that still is a part that you can do with our old primitive equipment that you saw in the exhibit, to the pulling out your iPhone. The technology has changed, but I think the idea and the purpose of telling our own stories through our own points of view is valid. So I hope young people will see how valuable that is, and will continue on. And like Eddie said, I hope people are just so pissed off at Trump that they'll go out and grab their iPhone and do something with it.
You know, one of my small contributions to the writing, the text panels, was the last panel. And the takeaway is 3 words. They all start with C: change, community, and commitment. And I chose those 3 things for a reason. Change, I mean, takeaway for me was that we changed ourselves. You know, that's so weird when you look at these photographs. At the very first Little Tokyo Asians for Peace rally, there were people in the audience wearing ties and suits, and I think one person had a hat, you know, and then a couple years later, 1972, we're like long-haired, army jackets, and we looked like, you know, we're like, the look was totally different. We had reinvented ourselves. We were like third world people. You know, we weren't just like, you know, Buddha heads or people from the community. We were something different. Change is constant. So for people watching the exhibit, I want them to know that you know, everyone changes. You have to change. The times make you change. Second thing, community. You can't do this by yourself. You need people. You need a community. You need people with a common vision and purpose. I hope that comes through in looking at why people did things like the health fair or in Chinatown tutoring kids. All that stuff needs to continue. And of course, you know, the last thing, commitment, that's probably the hardest one of all, because it requires you know, sacrifice. You know, movements are built on sacrifice. You know, think about the young students in the South during civil rights, the freedom riders. I mean, these people put their lives on the line. So, you know, it's kind of like, you can't talk to a 22-year-old today and say, put your life on the line. You know, I mean, you only do that in the context of real life events. And of course, we're living under one of the most dangerous catastrophes of all time, and that's climate change. So commitment means like you have to change the way you live, how you see yourself, how you seek community, and you know, you've got to save the planet and share the wealth. You know, that's the commitment we have to make.
Eddie had mentioned earlier that we started the project hoping to have a youth group who was using media to express their own community's challenges as part of the exhibit, and it just didn't work out. But I think the thought behind that was we're really hoping that young people could go through the exhibit, see that people essentially like themselves, young people like myself who came to VC with no skills and just kind of a willingness to try to get involved, can start to create, when banding together collectively, make some change. And so we're hoping that hopefully this kind of legacy will inspire young people to continue to do the same in their own communities.
Thank you, thank you. It's like Dean and I worked this out, that Dean would ask the last question that would sum up the entire panel. So thank you, Dean. So thank you, Bob, Eddie, Duane, and thank you all for coming. And let's continue.